And I just turned around and I hauled ass out of there. I was done. I wasn't dealing with that.
The hypocrisy of the cult is one of the things that turned me away the quickest.
When I turned my headlights on, it turned and looked at us, and one of the things I remember the most were the eyes were glowing red.
I see an orb of light. It is just circling these steps like it is waiting for me.
And he begins to tell them that he saw a UFO. They're basically like, what are you talking about? That's 7 foot up on a tree, peeking around it, and that's where I saw the top of the muzzle, nose, and the eyes. As soon as I made eye contact with this thing, it felt like death.
I'd like to take this time to welcome my guest tonight, Jeanette. Thanks for coming on here and talking to me.
Thanks for inviting me.
Would you like to let the audience know a little bit about yourself?
Well, okay. I have been a MUFON investigator for about 12 years. I've had paranormal in my life ever since I was 10 years old, probably before, but that's when I remember it significantly. And I moved to the Cascade Mountain Range, lived there for about 12 years, and that's where all of the Bigfoot occurrences happened. I'm a paranormal photographer as well. I capture interdimensional beings. My photographs have been validated, and that's about it for now.
Is there something that led you down this pathway, or is it just something you just were interested in?
Well, I used to watch National Geographic when I was a kid, and I was wondering, I thought the lifestyle was just really fascinating, and I never knew how people were able to do that. And so I certainly found out when I moved in mountains.
Mm-hmm.
And I started experiencing all of these things there. And I was on, apparently at one time, tribal land. And it was only sold to head of household, which I was. And so I purchased the land, and everything, happened after that. So do you want me to start, or would you like to ask me questions?
No, what I was getting ready to say is if you would like to start, you can go right ahead, and I will hold off on questions unless something really pops up that I feel that I need to ask. But for the most part, I don't try and interrupt the guest.
Okay. All right. Well, here we go. And okay, I've heard a lot of people talk about Bigfoot and whatnot, and they were saying, this thing disappears, it's interdimensional, and some people stick purely to it being a physical being. But isn't sticking to one thing or another disinformation? And this is the kind of a thing I'm going to get into tonight. I'm not going to be talking a lot about it, or at least I won't compare to what I know, and I'll be treating the topic superficially. But there's going to be a lot of information in here, hopefully, that people don't know about.
Okay.
So I'm going to be saying, maybe many of you have heard in 1959, the Ural Mountains, Bigfoot, or they thought a Bigfoot was sighted. They caught something in their camera lens, and all of the students that were taking that trip in the mountains died. And one person had their tongue ripped out and so forth. But, and they captured something on their film, and they said it was big and hairy. Now, I haven't seen a good picture of that close up, but it did look like there was a distinction between the top and bottom of it with the picture I saw, a light difference. And I'm thinking to myself, it could be clothing. But again, like I said, I haven't seen a good enough picture of it. But this being, I thought it was interesting at the time because Stalin was looking to interbreed a human being with an ape because they're looking at making the perfect soldier. So I'm considering that this being, and I always have, that this being is genetically engineered if it's in its physical form. Okay. There's a lot of things that are going to be said tonight. One is that, and the other one is the how your consciousness manifests things. And I have a lot of interesting stories about that. And actually, the Bigfoot could be all of those things. One of the stories I want to tell you about your consciousness is that I have been in the occult off and on for a while. We did an experiment in our temple, and we had witnesses. Each of us had 3 witnesses. Okay, everything was set up for us to do this experiment, and we were looking in a mirror, and each one, as we did it, actually disappeared out of view to the other people. We were still there. We were probably all standing among each other, a foot apart, and yet we couldn't see the person conducting the operation. Now, that's the capability that we have, whether you want to acknowledge it or not. And there are government programs that are very interesting, like Project Gateway, that have gone deep on these things. So this is what I think of when I think of Bigfoot disappearing. It has that capability to make itself unseen. There's otherworldly technology. There's Project Bluebeam and so forth that can actually manifest something in front of us, which happened to me. And I'll get into that in a minute. So we decided that we're going to retire, and I'm having a home built in the Cascades. It's in the middle of nowhere, in an area it's really 50 miles outside of town, but if you look at Google Earth, it seems like it's in the middle of absolutely nowhere. It's rough hills and woodlands and so forth. So we go up to this home, and it hasn't been built yet. We're in the process of looking at the property. So outside of our fence line, we look into the north. We're hiking. And what did we find there but a basalt altar? I didn't even say it was an altar. And my husband turned and looked at me and he said, "That's an altar." And he wasn't even into that kind of a thing. And I was really surprised. But it was a little bit past my waist in height, and it would fit a man easily outstretched. And it was polished. It was highly polished. And in case you don't know, basalt is radioactive. They've made sacrificial knives out of it. And it's interesting because there was a mansion in Belgium that the Nazis had black goo in it, and that was basalt, essentially. A long time ago, mystics used crystals to summon demons. And I performed a ritual at one time, and I did have a crystal. I just want you to see the relationship between what's going on with Bigfoot and technology, whether it is spiritual technology or modern technology. It's time that these 2 things get integrated into what we're seeing. Okay. So I did this ritual, and everything was sealed in the room. It was a newer building. And what I was wearing pressed against me because a wind came into the room. My clothes were flapping against the couch. The candlestick flame shot up a foot, laid on its side, and pointed to me in any direction that I went, like a compass needle. There was a hum in the room, like your head was in a beehive. And then the crystal I had, which was originally from Egypt. Apparently, it is said that a lot of Atlantean crystals from the two-eye stone were brought to Egypt. I'm not saying that this is one of them, but it was very peculiar how after the hum, the stone lit up the most brilliant red. It was lit from within. I was scared. And my clothes are taking off, and the flame is directly aimed at me, and the stone is just glowing along with the noise in the room. Well, later on, as I found out, the the sound was actually a dimensional rift. So there was a gap in time and space. That's what occurred. And in what I've written previously regarding frequency, I explain how what emerged from that sound, the rift in time and space, transferred itself inside of that crystal. Okay. The crystal is now lost because it came out of the bale. I no longer have it. I wish I did. But obsidian, also too, regarding the altar, is radioactive. And plays a very important role in UFOs and with cryptids. Because the same events, the same paranormal events surround both. So radioactivity has a lot to do with this. Technically, obsidian is a congealed liquid in a more liquid state. It is called black goo. And so using a sacrificial knife, people were able to conjure up alien or demonic technology. Because I have dealt with negative aliens and have actually seen them, I consider them one and the same because I've never had a good alien experience. So, let me see what else. Okay, they used the obsidian and the human blood sacrifice. It probably was an exchange for technology. The Atlanteans apparently are the Jews today, and the Atlanteans used blood sacrifice, and they had a very high technology. So there were two groups of aliens as well. The Amelius group, which are supposed to be the better ones, and the Belial group, which are not. And I went out and I went out with a Native American, and he was with the Modoc tribe. And we had lunch together. And he asked me about Bigfoot. And at the end of the luncheon, he was absolutely terrified when I told him what went on at the property. Then he went on to tell the elders about it. There are things that the natives will say, and there are things that they keep among themselves. And he told me very little. But when I was on this property, and I found out from a realtor that um, it, it was high in radon. Apparently, John Wayne bought all of these properties and he wanted to turn it into a nice house ranch type of setting where people could ride their horses. And all of a sudden, he left and nobody understood why. And I believe that it was the radon there, and it was only in certain areas. If you go outside of that, it wouldn't have any radon, but this did. And uh, when I started moving to the home, a bunch of events happened, and the construction workers were quite angry with me. Um, I would go over to the front door and I would unlock it, and I'd walk away from the front door. Well, by the time I walked out to the living room, and they'd be banging on the door. And I said, "Well, why don't you come on in? I just unlocked the door." And he said, "No, it's locked." So the house was locking itself. And it got so bad that I started to carry my keys around with me all the time because I was in the middle of nowhere. And if the guys weren't there, I couldn't get in the house. So, and then one night before my furniture arrived, I had very little there. I remember having a lamp on the floor. And we had a glass door in the back. I did have blinds on the windows and on the glass door. And I did have a TV. I was watching something that was absolutely hilarious on TV. And I started hearing this noise on the patio. And the patio was a poured slab of cement. And it was just very slow and very deliberate, bipedal walking, as if weighed down by tonnage. And when the foot would hit the cement, it sounded like a sledgehammer, but without the clink. And the sound would just resonate through the slab and through the rock underneath. And it was just terrifying. And I couldn't think of anything that would be that big and that heavy to make that kind of noise. And I felt intimidated because I just moved there. I didn't have any form of defense with me. And I worked my way over to the door, and I did have a porch light. So I flipped on the porch light, and I was getting too much feedback. I couldn't see anything through the glass door, but I barely moved one of the lats. And whatever that was on the other side was sentient enough to know where I was standing and to know my height, because it slapped the door where my face was really hard. So the door shook for a bit. And then I remember the next day I got up and looked, and I saw this massive handprint on the door. I had no idea what I was dealing with. And I couldn't imagine how big I was thinking a person could be to do that. But like I was talking earlier about genetic engineering. Well, apparently somebody was very interested in my home. And I can tell you that for 3 months, every day from 45 minutes to an hour, a black unmarked helicopter would circle my home. It would go probably as low as it could. I had pine trees there about 60 feet tall. and it would just stay to the height of those trees. Sometimes it would position itself right outside my bedroom window and just stay there. And I was so angry. And I would get out there and just look them up. I had, so that, like I said, that went on for 3 months. And it was almost like, okay, well, you weren't here before. What are you doing here? And then there was later on, there was a very tiny helicopter that came out and was hovering in the front. Now, my driveway was a rock driveway. It was 250 feet long. So I had a 3-acre property, and this little helicopter went really low to the ground. Of course, they had a pilot and had somebody traveling with the pilot. And this guy, I remember he's wearing a white shirt, khaki pants, and he started to stick his leg out. I was going to drop down the ground, and he had this big beaming grin on his face, and I was completely intolerant. So I'm standing on the porch with a rifle, and I'm waving him off. And he knew he was serious, so he put his leg back in. They both sped off. So, so I don't have any idea who that person was or where he came from. All I know is that there was an interest in this property, and I didn't see the other properties showing any interest by this group or whoever they were. And then I was out in the front, and I'm watering off my walkway. So I'm standing out there, and I'm watching a puma walk toward me. And it's not a flesh and blood puma. It looks, I can see through part of it. It looks like a hologram. This was a clear day, so a blue beam was working. I wouldn't have noticed it. You can see it better if it's more or less a cloud-filled sky.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, about 10 feet in front of me, and the puma just vanishes. And so when it's walking though toward me, I can see it was just really fascinating. It would put down its paw, and you could see it spread under the weight of the animal. So, I'm taking all of this in, and my husband is still working in Orange County, and I'm still overseeing the construction and doing all this stuff and by myself. So I have the walkway. The walkway's poured, and I put in these stones in the walkway, and they were all blessings for the house, and they were all inscribed, and it was really, really beautiful. With each step, there would be a blessing. But I also, having been in the occult, I took a slate-like stone, I put it close to the walkway and close to the front door, and it had the Lord of the Earth's name on it written in Hebrew. I made a mistake, and on the last letter of that name, because it changes when it's the final letter, it sort of means that it's the end, right? But instead, I wrote the incorrect letter for the end of the name, which means that it goes on into infinity. Well, after some more Bigfoot-like occurrences, something came and it took the Lord of the Earth's name away. The stone was removed. I took a shovel. I started digging into the earth to make sure it hadn't been covered. But no, his name was taken. Okay. And at this time, I was getting my sprinkler system put in. I had a mist sprinkler system put in. And the sprinklers, I would say, were probably about 7 inches tall, something like that, when they sprayed. And so, whatever this creature was, which I think was a Bigfoot, it would unscrew the sprinklers and it would lay them neatly right next to where they had been taken off. Then I was talking to a psychic that had interviewed me, and he said that there are big feet all around our property. And he said if I gave him the address, he'd be able to find them on Google Earth. I said, no, you can't. And he said, what do you mean you can't? Then I had to describe over time what was going on with this property. And that is that, okay, I saw the property and it looked just fine. Another day, when I looked up the property with their cameras or wherever they are positioned in space, probably off satellite, I could actually see, I had a planting bench and I could see the pots that I had and I could see the nuggets of dirt on the rim of the pots. That's how clear it was. I mean, you could tell if my hair was combed, everything was as if someone was right there with me. So now, needless to say, I can't do that. But what they did was that they kept obscuring my home. And today, when I look it up, I can't really see it clearly. I can get an aerial view, but that's as far as I can go with looking at that house. And it, and they kept changing it. That there was one time, okay, it was fully developed at one point, and I had landscaping in the whole bit. And then one day I looked up my house, and there was no house there; it was bare land. So this is another thing that they're doing with that property. Then I had I something kind of scary happened. I went outside and by this time, we're moved in and so forth, and he's there and everything. My husband's living there. But we had I was looking at tracks around the house, and it was a canine. And I this animal was circling the house every day, and I didn't know why. And the front paw was like 6 inches long, and it was like I think something like 4 inches, 4.5 inches wide, and that's pretty big. So
Yeah.
yeah, and then we had a lightning storm, and lightning plays an important role in this. I mean, as because it's electricity, okay? And in electricity, there's plasma, and hopefully, I'll get into later why that's so important. But anyway, we have this lightning storm, and we hear this pounding and pounding, and so when my husband's afraid, he acts irrational. And it's like I'm the one carrying this whole burden. So he anyway, I go out and we have a thick dowel in the glass door. And that's the door that this dog is pounding on, or whatever this canine is pounding on. And the door consequently is just rattling like crazy as he's throwing himself on the door. And my husband says, let the dog in. And I said, are you out of your mind? It's a strange thing. It's tearing everything up. And you want to let that in? And it's terrified? Well, let the dog in. So anyway, I get out my 357 snow. I open up the glass door. The dog had, or the canine there, has his face right there, gnashing his teeth. The dowel, fortunately, is there and is not allowing me to open up the door or to have the dog or to have the canine press the door open any further.
What did the canine look like?
Just one sec. I fired off a shot. I took a piece of its flesh off and it never came back again. The dog, or the canine, was completely solid black. It had hair that was sticking up that looked like a scared cat that was 2.5 to 3 inches long. It wasn't just long hair, it was sticking like straight up. And it had an iris, okay? And so it had white around that iris. But the iris and all that was solid black. So we had that, and I was grateful that the dog never came back, but I always was looking around, you know, and I always carried on the property. Uh, we cleared our lot. I mean, with the exception of the trees, we cleared it all of brush for fire, which allowed us a viewing vantage point, so we could see anything coming past our fence line toward us. Okay. Anyway, let me see what else. So, okay, we're on to the next thing now. There are a lot of things that happen here in between. There was a slamming of the cupboard doors in the kitchen. Every now and then, I had a jewelry box close to my bed. It was a stand-up one, and there would be a hand that would just absolutely slap it to wake me up. I had 2 cats. They were absolutely terrified. They would watch the rocking chair in the bedroom while it creaked. And they looked like my cats looked stiff. I mean, really stiff. They didn't, and the minute they saw an opening, they'd flee and out of that room. And that's probably with good reason. Okay. So we had this stuff going on. And my husband said, God, did you hear that noise? How in the heck could you sleep? It's in the house. And I said, I know. And there just was a lot of, and one time we came back from vacation and the house smelled so sanitary. And I believe that at one time they had a military hospital there. We weren't quite that far away from Fort Klamath, but the Modoc Wars were going on there on that property. And I don't think I'll go into that information, but I'm just saying that there's some sort of a way to come into our dimension. There's some sort of portal there, and actually a portal did open up, and I'll get to that later. But anyway, I'm trying to pick up where I left off here. And so what happened? This happened on June 27, 2013. We were both asleep, but I started hearing this. I don't know how to describe it. This calling out, it's not really yelling, it's just a call. And it's was peculiar to me because it was calling out in evenly spaced intervals. And when I was listening to it, I noticed that they had a faint human quality to them. But beforehand, excuse me, we had coyotes up there, and they were howling. But as soon as this thing started, the coyotes quieted down. Okay. And then, so I was hearing this, and then my husband asked me he, if I could move. And I'm thinking, well, sure, I can move. So I get my head off the pillow, but I couldn't raise it any further. And then I moved my hands, but it was as if my hands were anchored at the wrist. I could lift my hand off the bed, but I couldn't raise it from the wrist up, my arm. I couldn't move the rest of my body either. And that's all that he could move his own body too. And I'd wondered if that this was an infrasound, the effects of infrasound, because my husband was saying that he's never heard anything like it. And it just was really scary to him. But, at this time, we were pretty used to forest noises. And, a puma can make about 102 different calls.
Right.
And we've never heard this ever before. And, so he and I were carrying on a full conversation. So we didn't have sleep paralysis. And we were discussing this. And he continued to listen. But the thing is, each call that this thing made was preceded with a strong, heavy, raspy breath before. I mean, you would hear all of that. You would hear the air flowing out. You would hear the rasp before you heard the sound of the call. And the call was such that it was as strong as at the beginning. Like, if we go to speak, we build up to it. We build up to that word. We build up to that call. So it starts lower and it reaches a crescendo. Instead, this thing starts at the crescendo and ends at the crescendo. There's no fading away of the breath and the call. It's abrupt. And I felt I'm fairly empathic. So I felt as though, actually, it's so funny. I felt like there was something under my head. I felt like I was laying on the left side of its chest, and the sounds of its breathing and its vocalization were the loudest behind my right ear. And I never was able to figure out why it wanted me to feel that way. Why I felt that I was on its chest, why it had to be so close, and so forth and so on to me. I can give reasons based on some of the other things that I've experienced, but to know why for sure, I don't. And there was another time I felt this place was so bizarre because it was Indian land, and I believe portals were opened up, and I can say that for sure. A temple that I was involved in, they opened up portals, and they were quite afraid. And they had the rest of us come in, and because we weren't a part of that, to try and clear that and get whatever was there out. But it never happened. And what they did is they rented their their temple space in an industrial complex. They had to leave that industrial complex because I heard that all hell was breaking loose because of what they had done. Because it seems like people can open up portals, but they can't seem to close them. So this over here that I'm going to talk about has something to do with that too. At another time, I felt compelled to walk over to our bedroom window, gazing past my garden down the gentle slope. And there I saw a black mist advancing quickly toward our home, coming in from the south. It was pitch black, rolling on the ground, having a mind of its own. And given what we were beset with, I walked down a lot of paths trying to resolve what has been going on. Well, on this path, I read that the jinn like to be hidden and appeared to be dark mist, smoke, or even a dark fog. And it is said that Bigfoot is a jinn and even a fallen angel. That's the opinion of the lady that did the genome project for Bigfoot. And so black-robed humanoids are often called demons, appearing after waves of UFO activity. At one time on this property, my husband was a truck driver, so he was gone that night. And for some reason, I was awakened and I looked over at our bedroom window and this figure came in. It was black robed and hooded. I couldn't see a face. And it sort of floated across the floor and it went to the dresser and it picked up a miniature. It's a picture frame, but the picture frame is a miniature dresser with an oval picture frame on it, and it has a miniature lamp on it. So it looks like a part of a miniature room. And in it is our wedding picture. And so it goes over to that object and it picks it up. It looks at the picture and it says, "So you're married." And I said that I was and how happy I was with the person I was with. And there was a rocker switch on the bottom of it, and the miniature lamp would light up. This creature, this being, turned the lamp on and set it back on the dresser and floated back out the window. And I'm telling myself, okay, this is just a dream. So I get up the next morning, the phone rings, it's my husband, and he's wishing me a good morning. And I fell back into the stand because I had looked at the dresser and the miniature light had been turned on to that picture. So I was just absolutely blown. And I told him what had happened. So anyway, another one is a couple of months beforehand, I heard a pastor, a neighbor of ours, stating that many people in the area had become possessed. And here we have that rolling black mist. He and a few others were trying to exorcise them. Crimes against children and murders were being committed. I've come to realize something outside of ourselves is influencing us through our thoughts. And I still feel that way today. During this time, in the smallest town near us, folks will go out on watch parties to spot UFOs. Bigfoot made its appearances near to their homes. I've heard many tell me Bigfoot was in my backyard, it was here, it was there. We sat out in the car, we watched UFOs in the same area, hover overhead. Also, a solid looking, lingering orb was seen that was about 10 or 20 feet above the main street in our little town. The Modoc native person that I was talking to was a grandson of the last great holy man they had. And when he was out hunting in the woods with his son, he saw a triangular craft fly overhead. And he said that center light lit up. And he said he thought that the craft exploded, when actually what it did was jettison off. While the light was so intense when he thought it was exploding, he said it lit up all the woods and they could see all of the game that was available to them. In the year 2016, I went outside just prior to dusk, and there's still plenty of light. Now, this was a time of year. It happened every single year at the same time. It was a very special day. I would see this coming and I would go outside and all of the earth shimmered in gold. All of the soil, the plants, the trees, the sky, it all looked like it was raining gold dust. It was really something to behold. I tried to take in it, most of it, visually as much as I could. And it rendered a feeling of peace within me. It was a transformation of everything on the earth, and the sky transitioned into gold. While in this state, on this day, a strong thought entered my mind. The thought was, would you be afraid if you saw a Bigfoot? That's what I heard in my head. Mentally, I said no. After all that I've been through, why would I? So, while we were on this property, we had a very large orb appear. It electrified the air around it for over 2 weeks. There were other things, mists that would come out of the ground. A UFO appeared under the power lines on the lot next door. It was bell-shaped. The surface was such that it couldn't be detected by radar. I discussed all of this with Charles Hall. We had a nice little conversation about all of it. But I mean, these are some of the things that went on that I didn't go into any great detail of all the other things that happened. And then I saw slightly out of my peripheral vision, approximately 40 degrees to my left. The Bigfoot was walking about 85 feet from me for a distance of approximately 45 feet on the opposite side of our fence, moving toward where the altar used to be in the north, before he disappeared behind a tree. It didn't turn its head to face me the entire time. It was a medium dark gray in color, medium through dark gray in color, had a sagittal crest, which may have been indicative of its age, and had very long fingers and a graceful curvature to its hands, which didn't indicate joints. It was just the hand was very fluid looking. And its posture was absolutely amazing. It wasn't stupefied like most people depict the Bigfoot to be. I mean, this was the most, I don't even have language for this. This was the most perfectly postured, erect, confident, strong, take no shit kind of a being that I have ever seen. And it was very human-like in its movement, with the exception that they do walk in that very fluid way. But I thought everything that I've seen to date does not look like what I've seen.
Mm-hmm.
So again, with the interest in the black helicopters and what was going on there and what Stalin was trying to do, and with the capability of the human mind to not, how am I going to phrase this? To not allow other people to see them are things that we can do. And it does seem like the ultimate soldier, integrating incredible strength, the, the, and not needing the material things to survive that we do. It almost seems like they're doing a test run for the perfect soldier. It doesn't, it doesn't need a great deal of maintenance. It's incredibly strong, and it's empathic, and it can make itself invisible. And just like we can. I mean, there was another time too, I remember that I was in high school and I'd gotten in an argument with my boyfriend. So I was in the backseat of the car while everybody else was out having fun. And he was concerned, so he called the police. And I said to myself, he's not going to see me. So, and I was all dolled up because I was on the drill team, and I was all dolled up in sequins. So I'm laying on the back seat, and the cop comes over, and he's flashing his flashlight. And he says, "Where is she?" He said, "What do you mean, where is she? She's right there." And the officer could not see me at all and walked away. I mean, we have the ability to do this, which is why it bothers me so much that they want to brain chip us, because we can change our outcomes, because we can manifest if we learn how. We don't have to stay to an agenda. And I don't want that. Okay. So another time when I was talking to the MODOC gentleman, and we were out having lunch together, he asked me at least 3 times if the Bigfoot was on my property. I repeated that it walked on the opposite side of our property line on the other side of our fence. Okay. And he was just very unsettled. He asked me about the altar. And he asked me, excuse me, the stone, the slab, one piece slab. He asked me if it was just there on top of the earth or if it was on top of rocks. And I said, well, I don't know if it was on top of rocks, but there are a lot of little rocks around the bottom of it. And at that particular point, that's when he became terrified. And apparently it means something to them if they are on your property, which is why he wanted to make sure it was not on the property. Okay. And and then I caught some activity. I found a small footprint on the side of the house. I forgot what other events that this was followed by or preempted it. But anyway, so the Modoc person was telling me, he said that the little people are there. They know that they're there. And again, you see, most of the stuff is occurring on the south side of our home. And I would hear such incredible noise sometimes at night on the side of our home. I thought, that's it. I'm going to go out there in the morning and everything's going to be completely ripped apart. I mean, the shelving is going to be ripped off. The pots are thrown everywhere. The trees jerked out of the ground. I mean, it's just bad. So I would go out there the next day and everything would be in order. I would just hear this sound. But the other thing is that there had been many, many occurrences of manipulation of time. And the time, we had an atomic clock. And either would go forward an hour or backward an hour in time. And there was a time when I was in the bedroom and I heard these heavy bipedal footsteps as if weighed down by an incredible weight walking across the bedroom floor. Of course, the cats, they're out of there. And it was so strange and then when I heard the sound, for some reason, I just lay back down and I was in a deep, deep sleep. And then the morning came and I didn't see anything moving around. I just heard this thing walking. So the next morning, I saw the blinds were askew on the window and the dowel had been moved out of the window. And this was when about the time my husband and I would start getting all marked up. And we had bruises on our inner thighs. I recall having a dream, or I thought it was a dream, lucid dream of being taken away. There were 4 or 5 men outside the house. They were wearing all black. I was put into a craft, and I don't want to say what went on after that. But then I came back, and the next day, like I said, I had the bruises. My husband had his bruises 1 or 2 days later. And then I had a mark on the inside of my nose that ran up. It looked like somebody ran a line on the inside of my nostril, and it was fluorescent green. So that's all. I mean, these are all things that happen at that place. But let me see. And one night I was in bed and I was gripping onto the sheets really hard, so much that your nails bend backwards. and feels like they're being pulled out of your fingers. And I finally release one of my hands and I start swatting my husband because I want him to wake up, and he's not waking up, and which is very typical in situations like this. I don't know what they do. I'm going to back up. When my head hit the pillow, I was talking when he was alive to Mark McCandlish, and he said the military has a substance called angel of death in a can, and you give a person a couple of hits with that, light hits, and they're out. If you give them more, they're dead. And so I remember the dream of the people being in black. I know that there's a base not far from there. I know that the military has an interest in our property. And I don't, anyway, so I know that because of what they can do, and with Blue Beam and everything, quite aware that religion can be manipulated. I know that they've been hunting for doing ancient archaeology reconnaissance, been looking for implements from times past in their technology. And let's see. And then so the getting back to the Modoc Indian, he said, you wonder why all this is happening to you. It is because you live in one of the most holy of places. This to me meant that it was not a place that events occurring there could be rationally explained. Instead of being called unexplainable, they called them holy. But to back up a little bit, because I know I broke off, but when I was grabbing onto the sheets and I couldn't wake my husband, eventually I settled back down to the bed and I wasn't feeling that pull. I looked ahead of me past the footboard of the bed. There was probably 6 feet after the footboard of the bed before the dresser. The dresser had a very large mirror on it. It was a hutch. And in front of that dresser, I saw a whirling gold, whatever it was. It was like a spinning motion of something that was gold, and it was spinning. And I was quite terrified, and I was trying to, stay centered. So when I looked at it, all of a sudden it stopped spinning. And then I slunk out of bed, squeaked past it, went out the door, went in the kitchen to see if I could find anything else going on in the house. And I went to the refrigerator and I got a glass of orange juice. And I asked myself, what the hell just happened there? And I'm still shaking. I'm still drinking my orange juice. I'm looking out the kitchen window to see if I can see anything, if I can. So then I'm there a while, and I know that there's nothing I can do to change anything. So I just kind of man up, and I walk back, and there's a small hallway. Our bedroom door's on the left, and then there's a small hallway in front of it, and then the wall to the hallway on the right. And it's probably maybe only 5-6 feet deep, that hallway. But on the wall of the hallway ahead of me is a cuckoo clock. And I walk up to the wall and I feel an incredible pressure on my left shoulder shoving me down. And my legs are shaking because of the pressure on my shoulder. And I'm grabbing both hands and I'm hanging onto the wall. And I said, "You bastard, you're not going to make me kneel. I won't kneel to you or anybody else." So I just stayed firm. I felt a release of the pressure eventually. I walked in the bedroom and that spinning object, probably a portal, was gone. In addition to which, at another time on the south wall again, where we found the footprints, the Bigfoot footprint was there, which was the left footprint. Shortly thereafter, weirdly enough, there was an eyedropper on the ground. And if you'd seen this property or seen where it's located, you wonder, how in the hell did that get there? But there was a left footprint, and that's what is said is left before they go into another dimension. At one other time, I found another left footprint on another place on the property going toward where the altar had been. Okay. And then, oh yeah, the altar was also, when we moved in, I don't know how many tons that stone was. The Modoc said that was their altar. They used their altar for all sorts of things, births and deaths. And I go, well, okay, then what are all sorts of things? And that's what he wouldn't tell me. He said that was their altar. And when we moved in, all the weight of that stone, the whole stone was gone, completely gone. And I was talking to a guy that became a medium. He was really quite excellent. And he told me the earth took it back into itself, because it wasn't for me to use. Okay. So, I don't know where I am with this, but I'm kind of losing my place. But let me see. What else do I have? Okay, so superficially, oh, okay, and when we see these things, they also now have that invisibility cloak, the invisibility shield, and all that other stuff. And when they were in our property, they had a plane that would fly overhead every day at 3:00. Remember, in this mysticism kind of thing, and this Illuminati or whatever it is, they use it's very symbolic. They use numbers for everything, and so this was 3:00. This private-looking Cessna type plane would fly overhead, and I couldn't see it. I couldn't see any of it. But I'm very good with sound, and to me, sound has a beginning and an end. So if I hear a sound and I don't see a craft, maybe a tree's blocking it or whatever, I can tell where it's going. So I was confronted by this guy in town. He goes, "Have you been hearing planes, but you can't see them?" I mean, he just took this up from out of the blue. And I said, "Yes." And so finally, the plane that was flying over our house, I did see it one day, but then it disappeared. I mean, first it'd be the wing, and then maybe the tail, and then the whole fuselage would disappear. I mean, so something with the military was going on there. And of course, today we do have planes that are invisible. So, and then we have, even President Trump acknowledged that. So, to discuss some of these things superficially, we have the Phoenix Project merged out of the Rainbow and Montauk and MK Ultra projects. And these involved making a ship invisible to radar, controlling a man's thoughts through magnetics, and bending time. So that breach in time when I was telling you about the crystal.
Mm-hmm.
So they're aware of those things. And they probably have become more aware of them when through Project Gateway and the likes of those things and MK Ultra, because there's a percentage of the people that have certain birth conditions that they anticipate will go into the military, and then they ask them to go into these projects to contact these beings, very much kind of like the Vril did when they helped the Nazis build the flying craft that they did. But anyway, through these projects, it was found that our minds were electromagnetic, and as such, they could be influenced by an external electromagnetic field, allowing people to be controlled remotely. In 1972, Sage radar broadcasted on the same identical frequencies as William Reich used for his orgone studies. The military found that if they activated the radar on multiple people in a room, hitting them with 100 megawatts, or it may have been 100 million watts, they really weren't sure, of a radar beam while typing in a command, the computer would pulse their transmitter, and as a consequence, the person would do whatever the computer dictated to some extent. The pulse power used was up into the terawatts. After having done this, they realized that they could access a human's mind by a computer. Part of their process was to use psychics who visualized a behavior, and a computer with the required power amplifying the psychic's thoughts. The amplified thoughts affected the subject's behavior, which in turn overcame their normal defense system. Now, I've forgotten the name of that book. It's quite popular. Is The Missing 401?
The Missing 411?
Yeah,
David.
I think so. When the hunters, these were seasoned people.
Yeah.
And they went out there and they were found as if they were plucked out of their clothing. Their clothing just dropped like down around their knees. They walked out of their clothing. The muzzles of their guns oftentimes were found stuffed with dirt. And they went into areas that was imminent that they were going to die. But they did so anyway. And I think it's very interesting that, okay, let's say they were disrobed, but they were also taken to areas that were cold, either higher in elevation or left partially in mountain streams, almost as if to preserve a dead body. I mean, they weren't just left in a warmer area. They were taken to colder areas. I thought that was interesting. They were refrigerated, essentially. But anyway, to go on with this about the transmitter would pick up that envisioned virtual reality, that thought reality. Then it would be picked up by sensors and it would go to a computer bank. When it would be stabilized, the computer would feed it to a radar transmitter and it would create the electromagnetic equivalent of a thought form. They could even transmit that thought form to another destination. Okay, now I'd like to break off again here and mention two other things. One is that in the temple I now go to, they create a person had the ability to create a thought form. I did not know that they created a thought form. I went in there with a bunch of other people to do a procedure. I picked up on the thought form because he asked if anyone wanted to speak, and I started describing it with the presence that I felt there. Immediately, he sprang from his throne, ran to the front, and told everyone that I ably described the egregore that was created. Okay, I could even tell you the location where it was in the room at times. So that was an active energy. That was an energy that was given life. Essentially, what we can do with our brain, it's a directed energy weapon. Okay, and so also too, on that property out there, I photographed a reptilian. It was a Draco reptilian. I can never ever get picture to print out correctly. It was coming down from the sky, sweeping down from the sky. It had a long neck. And it had the multiple protrusions on the head, which are not horns. They're just scaly appendages. The scales just pile up and build up on top of one another, and one would think that they're horns. I had it analyzed. It's totally valid. And it's in a semi-transparent state. And it's accompanied by an orb. And I feel that is a projection of consciousness. Let me try and explain that. It's a little. I explained it in my books, and I try and make it so just an average person can understand it. But when you're giving off light with your brain, let's say that's your aura, that's your electromagnetic field, depending on how powerful it is. When you're giving off that thought, light, and you're creating something in your mind, you can actually give it a physical form. And there was a man that in Canada that came down with cancer, and he wasn't given much time, and he had to report to the hospital. He told his friends that night. He put on his video camera and his phone on, and he caught hundreds of orbs floating around in his room. Those were the good intentions your thought has for. Those were the good intentions, the energy from his friends that went to him to help him. He went into the hospital the next day and has no trace of cancer. None. So words do have power, and so do your thoughts. So I have one other thing to say about that. I just forget what it was right now. But so their transmitter had the power to bring into our physical reality whatever the psychic thought about. The thought form would appear out of real time, which meant there was a working time portal, because we can bend time and space. And in another book of mine, I tell you how the mind can go beyond itself and can gather information that it's needing that it can't get in any other way. So let me think about what I had it just a minute ago. I lost it. Okay. Essentially, light, which is a frequency, is generated by a thought via its synapses in our brain. It can materialize an object or a being, which means that it is possible for a physical object to manifest out of this light frequency. the light that is generated has radiation in it. And you wonder why non-man-made UFOs are around nuclear power plants, because they're always hemorrhaging underneath radon. And now I remember what I was going to say. This young woman talk about generating and creating physical form. She was very young, and she would stare out of her home every day and would look at the church tower kind of diagonal across the street from her. And she'd just look at this bell tower, and she would imagine this wretched, creepy, crawly thing crawling up the tower. Until one day it did. And that is my premise. The worse the world gets, the more horrifying it becomes. People want an end to it. They want to resolve what this is. And so what they do in their sleep, they create these things. And you'll see, not saying this is done all the time, this is one aspect of it. But this is probably a lot of what's going on, the traumatized people in Puerto Rico, with all the things that are crawling around in the street and the things you see there, because they don't have an easy life either. And then they had another lady was telling me about this story. Her son was in the military, and he's right at Nellis. He last stationed at Nellis Air Force Base. And he wanted to get into all this high clearance stuff. So he was involved with all that. So after he was done serving his term, in the interim, he came over to live with his mom, which was in Las Vegas. And then he said that he couldn't say everything that he was involved in. He couldn't speak of it. And one day his mom and he were in the living room when he was telling her this, as a matter of fact. They were in the living room. They were looking out the glass door in their backyard. And a white orb was in their backyard. And he ran terrified into the deeper reaches of the house, yelling, "They're watching me, they're watching me." So it's not like it's foreign for the government not to experiment with consciousness. Because oftentimes when a person remote views and they're seen by others, they appear in the form of an orb. So likely he was being monitored by someone else's consciousness to see if he would talk about what he was involved in. They also had, as far as technology goes with all this stuff too, apparently George Knapp was in this video, George Knapp's USO UAP Files podcast S2E50. Okay. So it was a remote operated vehicle off of the French coast of Normandy. It was illuminated 200 yards in the distance. A night watchman saw the orb going into the ocean, now being identified as a USO. George said, "I'll be damned." Peter Osborne analyzed the stills in the video. The orb's appearance vacillated from milky to jelly-like and then into a solid. 2 more lights from above came down. Then all 3 lights conjoined. The thoughts on this orb ranged from plasma, which he said would have boiled the water, and the other was a gravitational lensing in which a dense gravitational gravitational field is created around it, making all of the ambient light lens around it like pressing a goldfish bowl into a basin of water, moving water out of its way. The gravitational field bends light. Okay, so China and the US, but especially China, have built the world's most powerful hypergravity facility, simulating gravity 900,000 times stronger than that of Earth's. From the University of Hong Kong, it was said China turns on hypergravity machine compressing time and space to mimic natural events. Recently, I saw a video now removed that essentially said condensed gravity creates a plasma, which is a medium for intelligence and interdimensionals to enter. And it indicated that it was doing gravitational cleansing. This would allow for a consciousness to travel in it, or perhaps an AI, artificial consciousness, creating the all-seeing eye in the sky. How many times have you heard of an orb where they said it was acting intelligently? And intelligence, actually, as I have written, can only live in an orb for a very finite period of time. Maybe they've improved that, because it seems everything on the other side is mimicked by technology. According to Elon Musk, plasma is the conjuring of an actual conscious being, because an electric field exists within plasma. And I'm going to end it here, but further explanation has gone into what I've already written. You want more detail?
Okay. For me, I did have some questions and then some other things that I'd noticed when you were talking about it. You mentioned obsidian.
Yeah.
I was told by someone that I needed to get obsidian for where I do my recording at because it's supposed to be a protective element. Is there any truth to that?
I know. I think that's really old school. I think it's what bloodstone's for, it's what amethyst is for, it's all of that kind of thing. But the reality is, you have to understand what it is and what it does, and you have to understand electricity, and you have to understand plasma. Personally, I have an obsidian dagger. Okay, and I also have a black mirror that's made out of obsidian, and it is radioactive. And I went with my black mirror, because they won't let you photograph. I went into the Stack Bacon's museum with it. And I had somebody come up to me and said, I was interested in this stuff. She said, but I am never touching it after listening to you. And I told her everything that I saw in that mirror. And they have some pretty nasty things in there. And I saw women, they had a cauldron, and I actually saw her life exterminated. I mean, it showed it right there in the mirror. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do that old school stuff. I mean, crystals hold memory right now. There's some weird. I haven't really gotten into it a lot, but they're noticing in the UK they've done some tests on people, and their blood is changing to a crystalline kind of a blood. And apparently, a friend sent me some information. There's a patent number on it, that something had been in this fog, or they believe something had been in the fog, and is changing blood to this crystalline substance. So I wouldn't. I really would stay away from doing what your friends suggested.
I actually don't know the person. It was just a random
Mhm.
person that sent an email suggesting I do that. And
Just trying to help.
I am very superstitious in general. So I don't do any sort of crystals or anything like that. That's just not anything that I've ever, not so much that I've been not interested in it. It's just something that I don't mess around with.
Mhm.
But you mentioned books. Have you written books?
Yeah, I have. I've written it, and I don't know. I wrote one. It was at the beginning when it was really shaky. I wrote my first book. It was kind of shaky, and there were errors in it because of I'm a self-published, and it was a lot of it's because of who I'm dealing with the publisher. It's just God, we're practically having fights on the phone every day, and because I don't know, they can't spell. I don't know what they're doing. So I had arguments with them, and I was going through so much Bigfoot activity. We had an orb, and that would come every night at 9 o'clock, and it was red, and it would hang at a certain elevation in the sky in front of the house. And every time it did that, my book would disappear off my computer, and I was scrambling for the information again. I couldn't get the same information again, and I must have had to rewrite that thing like 3 different times, and we had a and then I was at another time I was in the bedroom reading in the rocking chair, and my husband was in the living room watching TV. We heard this horrendous, horrendous, horrible noise, and it sounded like somebody dropped a dozen balloon balls down from the ceiling, and we were on a foundation, so it just resonated even more. And he said, "Did you hear that?" And I said, "How could I not?" So I said, "That's it, that does it." So I just grabbed my testing material. I said, "I'm going out." He said, "No, you're not going." It's the first time in his life he ever covered me, with a firearm.
Mm-hmm.
So I ran out of the house, and I started describing because I start feeling around like, I have certain skills, so I could tell where this thing was, and I described the shape and everything. And come to find out, it was exactly that manifested on the photo later. We had two orbs, pretty big ones, one on top of the other, and they moved out of our walking path off to the side. So that demonstrates the intelligence. And then we had, oh my God, we had something coming out of the window, and it was very Bigfoot looking, and it had small eyes and very thin lips. And then it was coming out of the window that the noise, coming out of the room that the noise was made in. And it had one of its shoulders out of the window and its neck and its head. And over time, that picture transformed. It transformed to a Bigfoot, to a gray, and talking to people and being in the UFO field and all that other stuff. So that's what they were saying. It's part of the communication process, that the shape shifting and your pictures changing is a communication. So are we seeing a Bigfoot, or is it something else that's presenting itself as a Bigfoot? Or is this, in fact, if it isn't at times a technology to see how they can manipulate our thinking, how they can manipulate religion, and essentially the direction that people are going?
Yeah, I wonder that myself. There's too many. I'm friends with people that are very flesh and blood about Bigfoot, but
Mhm.
but then there's also those aspects to where Bigfoot has the woo side to it, where it disappears, where it comes in and out, and
Yeah.
I
Well,
personally,
that's just it.
I've never
Yeah.
seen
See,
one, so I can't really. I don't really have a
yeah.
definitive opinion.
Well, like I try to convey. I mean, okay, it was found originally after going to 12 different labs the DNA material was meticulously harvested and cared for, that they found out that on the maternal side, the Bigfoot was human. And the paternal side, it was unknown what this was. That's why this person, given the ability that this thing has as Nephilim, okay? So in the temples, when people ascend and go up through the ranks, there are certain ones that do, and they believe that they are of royal blood. Okay. And so I had my DNA done, and there's a percentage of it, like Bigfoot, and like she thinks it's Nephilim, that my DNA, that fraction of it, is an unknown. It's not associated with any landmass on Earth. So there's an interest by the military and the government and certain people. I had my DNA done, so what happened later on, I thought I'd go back in. I thought, I'd look at some different things and maybe know that I had the time for it. I'd see more of who was my relatives and so forth. Well, before I started doing that, I found out that there was a class action lawsuit. And they came in and only wanted certain people's DNA, certain people's. Mine was one. And again, a portion of my DNA cannot be identified. And I disappear. I've done it many times. I can't do it on cue, but I have disappeared. And I've done some other things that are a little bit different, and then when our DNA was taken, there was a class action lawsuit. So that happened. So when I went back to look at my ancestry, they also erased all record of mine ever being there. I mean, I copied some of the documents that I had and put them in my file in my computer. So I was definitely there, and they definitely analyzed my DNA, but the record is gone. Now, why are they doing that? How many other people are they doing that to? What are they looking for in our DNA? Are they looking for DNA for that soldier program? What are they doing?
I've been very skeptical of the whole 23andMe or whatever it's called, where they
that's who I went.
Yeah,
that's exactly.
I don't know everything about it, but I know sending my blood and DNA off to whoever seems a little weird.
Mm-hmm.
So I've never done any of those genealogy things because to me, again, I'm kind of a conspiracy guy over here, so I don't trust it.
Well, they're all, I found out only later that they're all Chinese companies. And right now, the Chinese, with 100% accuracy, they've developed a bomb that can kill all Caucasians.
I haven't heard that one.
Oh, yeah. And they're working on it. Make it race specific.
I did want to ask, do you still live in the same area where all the Bigfoot activity was happening?
No, I don't. A woman, well, we were getting older, so we needed to make life more convenient. We worked very, very hard chopping wood. I mean, we worked really hard. And then, and a woman told me, she said, Jeanette, I'd like to see you move from here because I have a feeling you're going to become part of this place if you don't. And when I told you that porthole opened up in the bedroom, there was another deal when I would go out the south side of the house, and I was kind of terrified because I told you the Modoc War was there, but I have a parabolic dish. So I went out there on the side of the house, and this was shortly after we got the little footprint on the side of the house for the little people. And I raised it in the air, and I could hear a lot of human screams. They were tormented. And and then I brought the parabolic down, and aimed it straight in front of me, and I aimed it down, didn't hear anything. Just when I aimed it up. It was terrifying. It was a terrifying place, and I had an Ovilus 3, and it's gone now because the contact strip, the the climate kind of chewed that up. But it was like 100% accurate, and it even told me about a particular pastor that was murdered out there. And I discussed this with a friend of mine. I had never heard of this man, and he said, "Yeah, he was killed by the Indians." And so they describe his death as being on that property. But the obelisk was, and then when when I left there at this one spot where the reptilian appeared, this all happened in the same part of the property. I buried a blessed rosary there when I left it. But I don't know. It was just, and then my obelisk would describe this thing that appeared as a Draco. And at one time it gave its name, but my husband was just talking so much because he was just so nervous and scared that I didn't get it. And must have been at least 10 characters long at the very least, a very long name of this thing. And but every time I would pass it with my obelisk would say silence, burning, and it would shut itself off. So I don't know if the Indians cremated their people there, or if it was something more than that.
Mm-hmm. It's always hard to know when it comes to stuff like that, what's really going on.
Yeah, it is.
There was a couple other things I was thinking about earlier, but I'll be honest, I didn't write it down, and now I forgot what it was. But you'd mentioned a whole lot of different activity, but when it comes to the Bigfoot stuff, you'd mentioned how you thought that they were like engineered, basically. My only thing
They could be.
Yeah. My only thing with that would be is like, there's been reports from like Native Americans seeing something like that years before. So that's just all I was going to say is like, I don't necessarily know if that would be the case. I'm not saying it's not a possibility, but I just know there's been a lot of reports of them everywhere.
I think they're both. I think because what they're finding is that there's the copycat. There's the UFO, the interdimensional UFO, that probably comes through radon and other substances like that. Because you're going to find that where there's a lot of earthquakes, the earth grinds and it releases radon, and that's where your UFO sightings happen.
Mm-hmm.
Like in Missouri and all that stuff. I mean, now there's another pool of radioactive slop that they have outside of St. Louis, and they have a lot of things going on there. And the government, God, I'm seeing so many lies now, so many twists. The government actually released a radioactive substance from St. Louis to see how it affected the people there. And then you're having a breakout of all these cryptids and these orbs and all this other stuff as a result. So,
all the drone sightings.
I think that's something else. I always did think that those were ours, but
no, I think they're ours, but I think they're up to no good.
Yeah, I do too. I think that's because since I had that experience with that camera, I think, and a long time ago, even in that time period, they had satellite that was able to see read license plates in underground parking structures. So what I'm thinking is that they're looking at their equipment, and Trump's residence is right around there. I'm thinking it's just another form of their voyeurism with the cameras, and they can look in people's homes, and they don't want to tell you that. They don't want to tell you they're looking at. I mean, they can get pretty damn kinky with this stuff.
Yeah.
But I think the Bigfoot is there's a like Ben Rich said, we can take ET home. We can do everything ET can do, because we have these minds, these special minds, these trained and conditioned minds through Gateway and other things that can attain technology, and like the Frill did, and bring it back. So we surpass the barriers that are there with our mind, the barriers, because these folks are trained. I mean, I'm not really trained, and I can do a whole bunch of stuff, and it's accurate. I've been tested. It's accurate. So I think there's the real thing, and there's us trying to copycat that. And if Ben Rich said that, then we can do all of these things. You're having these two things go side by side, just like was a gravitational thing, gives it all these peculiar appearances, and it creates its own plasma. So then the plasma enters it, so then that would allow it to take on an intelligence, or even if they've mastered it, put in an AI intelligence, and it just surveils everywhere that it goes.
Mm-hmm.
So what does that eye in the sky mean? I don't know. That eye on the pyramid, and it frightens me, especially where I live. I mean, I see it everywhere. I mean, we go to Christmas displays, in the middle of the Christmas displays and obelisks. The Luxor in Las Vegas is now black. It's just, and then I go into stores, and they have pillows with the all-seeing eye, and they face you as you walk in the store. I mean, it's bizarre. It's just it's a very bizarre place here, So, but I do think the two of them running side by side. I think there's the phenomena we can't explain, whether that's surviving ancient technology that they had that we think is alien, because we're not used to seeing it. We're seeing it more, so we think it's alien. Or is it that now that whoever's doing this understands that ancient technology and is replicating it, and we know that that's ours? Maybe they're replicating it because they want to control it. I'm really not sure.
We've been going on for close to 2 hours, so I figure we can probably get close to wrapping this up. But before we do, is there anything else you'd like to talk about?
No, I'm good.
Okay. Well, it's been a lot to think about. I definitely appreciate you coming on here and talking with me.
Well, thanks for inviting me again.
That's not a problem. If you ever have anything else you'd like to discuss, just reach out to me and we can get something set up. I'd love to talk to you again.
Okay, would love it, Brandon.
No.
Have a very good evening.
You too. Bye-bye. If you'd like to be a guest on Tinfoil Tales, remember to send an email to tinfoiltalespodcast@gmail.com or go to tinfoiltales.com and go to the contact section. Make sure to follow me around on all the social medias. And just remember, truth comes at a cost. Are you willing to pay the price?
I heard a story late last night about something lurking along the wood line. Huge footprints, strange lights in the sky. They claim it's nothing, but I know they lie. It's easier to laugh in my face, but something about this makes me say, what if it's real? What if they knew? What if the answers are coming from you? Spinning stories, wasting my time, hearing voices, is it all in their minds? They can call me crazy, but I just want some proof. What if it's true? What if it's real? What if it's true? What if the world's not what we knew? Tinfoil tales pulling me in, a story that starts where the logic ends. What if it's real? What if it's true? The answers are waiting, they're waiting for you. They see a dog man walking, or maybe a mothman flies above the buried giants, hidden beneath the lies. They say it's just stories, it's all make-believe, fairy tales for the things we can't perceive. They want to keep us blinded, they want to break our will, but I'm not buying it, I'm not swallowing another pill. Force-fed poison, the lies were made to believe. What if the truth could set us free? Alien signals traveling through time, secret space programs erasing their minds. They call them crazy, but I just need some proof. What if it's true? What if it's real? What if it's true? What if the world's not what we knew? Tinfoil tales pulling me in, a story that starts where the logic ends. What if it's real? What if it's true? The answers are waiting, they're waiting for you. They laugh, they lie, we all could die, but the signs are there if you open your eyes. Aliens, cryptids, demons, ghosts, the Nephilim too. What if it's me? Or what if it's real? What if it's real? What if it's true? What if the world's not what we knew? Tinfoil tales pulling me in, a story that starts where the logic ends. What if it's real? What if it's true? The answers are waiting, they're waiting for you. It's all in our heads, it's all in our minds. These voices can't be silenced, the truth must rise. Tinfoil tales, it's pulling me through. What if it's real? What if it's true?